Hi everyone, my name is Darren Byler. I'm an anthropologist at the University of Washington. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my friend Perhat Tursun and his disappearance in January 2018. Perhat Tursun is a writer and poet. He, like hundreds of others, Uyghur poets and cultural leaders, were taken away in the great purges of 2017 and 2018. I got to know Perhat over endless cups of tea and Johnny Walker Red, which was his favorite, in his apartment high above Consul Street in downtown Urumqi. We talked about poetry, about philosophy, about human history. Perhat is a world-class writer. He has a mind that's very unique. He was born in 1969 in Atush, a small town of Uyghur traders near the Chinese border with Kyrgyzstan. Since 1989, he's worked as a folklore researcher at a government bureau in Urumqi, Xinjiang's capital city. And he's also been a poet, essayist, novelist, and screenwriter. He's one of the most discussed authors in Uyghur language today. He hates it when people call him the Uyghur Franz Kafka, which is something that many Uyghurs refer to him as. He thinks Uyghur writers should be recognized as world-class intellectuals on their own terms, not just as derivative world literature representatives of a Turkic Muslim ethnic minority group in northwest China. At the very least, he thinks they should be seen as the present instantiation of the great Sufi poets of the Uyghur past. It's difficult, though, not to compare Perhat Tursun to Kafka, or any other great writer of estrangement and paranoia. Like Kafka, Perhat has been a pencil-pushing bureaucrat by day and a writer of fictive criticism of madness by night. Yet, of course, because it is his wish, we are ethically bound to honor his demand that he be recognized not just as a pale reflection of Euro-American greatness, but as a living voice in the great human story. Unlike the authors we might lazily compare him to, he has never left the nation of his birth, and his many novels and collections of poetry remain largely unread outside of Chinese Central Asia. Although he was disappeared in January 2018, Perhat is likely still alive. He still demands our attention. Like I said, Perhat has a uniquely gifted mind. Ever since he published his first Uyghur language poem at the age of 11, he has been devouring literature and philosophy. He learned Chinese so he could read Freud and Schopenhauer in translation, and then he learned English so he could read Faulkner and Nabokov in the original. Name a philosopher, writer, or poet, and he'll give you a detailed analysis of their work. The inspiration for his work on madness comes from his reading of Foucault and Lacan, and his reading of verses of 17th century Sufi dervishes written in old Turkic language Chagatai. Perhat brings the voices of those Sufi friends of the universe into the present, just as he brings a persona of Kafka into the Uyghur world. He is an heir, then, both of ecstatic wanderers in the Central Asian desert and an anemic ascetic from Prague. He tells us that, like his grandfather Mihman, we are all just humble guests of this strange thing we call human life. When we find ourselves surrounded by scorpions and snakes, it's best that we sit by our local river, weep, and remember where we came from. Now I'm going to read excerpts of one of his poems. It's called Franz Kafka. It's written in 2003, November of that year. And I think it tells us something about how he wants us to think of him today, even as he's in detention. Franz Kafka. Before he died, Franz Kafka made a friend promise to burn all his manuscripts to prevent the exposure of his secrets to strangers, but his friend betrayed him. In those manuscripts, Franz Kafka had written a letter to his father that his father had never received. Through its disclosure, the whole of humanity became untrue to him. Although everyone had presumed that the earth was a sphere, when he explored the farthest edges of the world, he discovered that the earth was clearly a square. This was obvious, since the world's form cannot be fully contained by geometry. His illusions were thus truer than the real, and so his clairvoyance terrified him, unnerved by his vision of the void of infinity. Kafka often overheard the lamentations of the land and the outcries of the sun. sounds which no one else could hear, since no one could have been equally as depressed. Often overhearing those same sounds, I used to imagine becoming a writer like Kafka too. But I just became one of his personas. Kafka wasn't without hope. How could he be hopeless if he didn't expect anything? This lack was the origin of all of Kafka's pain. I feel Kafka's cold whining often. He pricks his own wounds with a pen. Then his purulent roses are revealed to mankind like a secret lover and raped, because love is exclusively for lonely people. Love needs secrecy and mystery. I left my home too, and by the rivers of the Tarim where I sat down, there I wept when I remembered Mount Odegan. I never got over the seduction of these feelings, and when I plucked out my eyes and flung myself into the well, I told everyone who asked, "Where is Perhat Tursun?" I told them to say, "He is in the well," and that his companions are snakes and scorpions.